Can I now invite uh, the program director of the Karan Human Rights, Htoo Htoo, to make her presentation. Ma'am, you have about 7 minutes, so you need to be succinct because we have to finish by in another 25 minutes. I know it's not fair to you, but that's all the time we have. And make the presentation, and then we will pick up the questions and see how to go with this. Thanks for joining us. The floor is all yours.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to member of APHR and the International Parliamentary Inquiry Committee for inviting me to speak today. And I'm incredibly pleased that APHR is launching this much needed inquiry into the ongoing military and humanitarian crisis in Myanmar. And I'm hopeful that this work will bring about the necessary action to end the conflict and bring justice for those who have suffered so long the repressions and violence of the Myanmar military. For 30 years, KHRG has documented systematic and intentional violence against Karen people. The Myanmar military has engaged in unlawful killing, torture, and other forms of abuse, enforced disappearance and arbitrary arrests, the impositions of forced labor, forced relocations, and displacements, sexual violence, including rape, extortion, and distractions or confiscations of property and food. For over half a century, generations of villagers in southeast Myanmar have endured a climate of fear, insecurity, and abuse. Some villagers have lived their entire life knowing only that the current crisis is not only part of a much longer history of acts of repressions and violence that likely constitute war crime and crime against humanity, but it is clear result of the repeated failure by the international community to address these crimes and hold the military accountable. Since the 2021 military coup, current state has once again become a key target of attack by Myanmar military, not just through air and ground offensive, killing, forced labor, and arbitrary arrest, use of villagers as human shield, but also through the blockade of a humanitarian aid, which constitutes a war crime. Over 170 people in current state have been displaced since the beginning of the coup. Some villagers have been displaced for over a year now. Only a small fraction of displaced villagers receive any form of informal assistance. Most are struggling to have access to food, basic living supply, and medical care. Women and children and elderly are some of the worst affected by the ongoing attack by the military. And also, Thai government has placed heavy constraints on former border crossings into Thailand and has put back the majority of those seeking refuge. Neither ASEAN nor the UN has exercised sufficient pressures on the Thai government to respect international and customary protection standards. Therefore, most of the displacement remain internal and informal, and IDP hiding everywhere they can in the jungle, in the cave, along the river bank that make the international border they are not allowed to cross, exposing them to further threats to life by the SCC and the ongoing conflict. Because the SCC has returned to a focused approach, the military tactic of cutting off essential resources to civilians as a means to destroy the support base of ethnic armed organizations or villagers in current state, whether displaced or not, are currently confronting problems in access food and work, healthcare, education, and other essential services, and thus are in need of support. Local civil society organizations and community-based organizations and ethnic service provider and faith-based organizations, all of whom have knowledge and experience with the local context, have been the primary actor providing humanitarian aid and emergency support to displaced villagers. With this decade of experience and expertise, these groups are collaborating to provide service at several displacement sites along the Thai-Myanmar border and distribute emergency support to IDPs and other vulnerable people farther inland. However, these local actors who are effectively providing aid are excluded from major funding sources, while fundings continue to be directed toward INGO and SEC, contradicting commitments made by the international community to localize humanitarian aid. Despite Myanmar's promise to facilitate the distribution of humanitarian assistance to priority areas, the SEC has repeatedly denied life-saving assistance to civilians in need in ethnic areas. KHRG has received a report of SEC soldiers deliberately impeding the transportation of food, medicine supply, and other essential items, as well as confiscation and destroying these items at a checkpoint and shooting at boats transporting supply to IDPs. Any funding and support to the SAC only serve to enable the SAC to continue waging war against the people of Myanmar, in particular ethnic people, and only exacerbates the humanitarian crisis in Myanmar. Cross-border channels are able to operate more independently and effectively under the current situations because not dependent or approval of the SEC. Cross-border channels are also extend beyond the border area, reaching vulnerable population farther inland, thus are the most effective means of delivery through ethnic area and beyond. And also we might have the Coco Lai, the SAC chairman of the task force on humanitarian assistance, refused to allow aid to pass through international land borders, stating that outside assistance can only be distributed through Yangon seaport and airport only. Further excluding ethnic area from it and limited the ability of local-based border organization to engage to protest service. So my recommendation is greater recognizance of local actors as the equal partner and focal points for service delivery is critical. Donor fundings for local actors must increase, and donor must not sideline ethnic community in decision-making process, but instead treat them as equal partners in the creations and implementations of aid program and service. Greater pressures on neighboring countries to ensure that their authorities do not deny entry to people crossing the border seeking refuge, and encourage them to work with cross-border organizations to develop support and protection service for those seeking refuge. Funding and arms must be kept out of the hand of the junta. As long as military junta has funding and arms, it will continue to wage war against the people of Myanmar. No true resolutions to the crisis will come about if the military continue to enjoy impunity. So public support for the International Criminal Court referral is needed, and all additional opportunity to hold the Myanmar military accountable for its vast array of crimes must be explored. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that presentation. I'm going to ask the committee members to hold on with their questions till we finish with Ms. Waiwai Nu. And then once she is done, then we'll take the questions together for both the speakers. Waiwai Nu, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair Santiago and the IPI and the APHR for coordinating this important event. Excellency, as my colleagues and friends has described, since the attempted coup to overthrow an elected government last year, the military continued to advance a brutal campaign of terror against the entire country. In over 16 months, the junta has murdered at least 2,000 people and abducted over 14,000, according to our civil society partners, and announced the enforcement of death penalty of 4 democracy activists. The tens of thousands confined in squalid interrogation centers and prisons face the most egregious forms of torture. And as my organization's Women's Peace Network has reported, women and members of the LGBTQ+ community face heightened risks of being subjected to the junta sexual violence in such conditions, as well as the country's growing areas of armed conflicts. As the junta continue to launch airstrikes and other heavy weapons on these borderlands, more and more of these civilians are forced to flee with their children and loved ones, also as escaping widespread attack on violence, including on their schools, medical facilities, churches, and homes. Today, hundreds of thousands of them seek refuge in Thailand and other neighboring countries, in addition to over 1 million already internally displaced. For the people of Myanmar, such data are not just numbers, but are forever a reminder of our collective pain and suffering. And for many of us, they fuel us with a united will to hold the junta accountable for its brutality and establish a truly inclusive federal democracy in Myanmar. Yet for many ethnic minorities in Myanmar, what has happened since the military's attempted coup is just another episode of the military's decades-long brutalities. For generations, the Myanmar military has perpetrated atrocities against our communities as a way to subjugate us. The United Nations Independent International Fact-Finding Missions on Myanmar has in fact reported that such acts amount to crimes against humanity, war crimes, and in the case of my community, Rohingya, genocide. Today, 10 years after the 2012 wave of the state-sponsored violence in Rakhine State, over 1 million Rohingya refugees remained in squalid refugee camps and detention centers in countries such as Bangladesh, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Many of them were forced to flee the Myanmar military's genocidal campaign in 2017. The over 600,000 remaining Rohingya in Myanmar, which include at least 140,000 confined in internally displaced person camps, face an extreme risk of being resubjected to further atrocities. Since the attempted coup, the military has intensified its policies to achieve its ultimate goal in destroying Rohingya. As I shared to the Human Rights Council this week, these policies include sweat and sit survey, which is an abusive family check-in processes requiring Rohingya to present national verification card, which do not confer citizenship and identify Rohingya as Bengali, to conduct their daily activities, including traveling for medical treatment, schools, and restrictions on their freedom of movement. According to WPN, since the attempted coup, the junta has further detained over 12,000 Rohingya, 1,200 Rohingya, sorry, and sentenced them to 2 to 3 years of imprisonment. Therefore, today, we are once again reminded that the world's failure to end such atrocities emboldened the Myanmar military to launch the coup and terrorize the entire country. The international community has in fact been blindsided by the country's so-called democratic transition, moving its members to continue acting in line with the military's command. From a near decade of activism, and as a former political prisoner, I also know firsthand that the government and the governments and international organizations, including UN organizations, refuse to meaningfully engage with or listen to ethnic minorities, especially the Rohingya. Indeed, the international community failed to address our atrocities in a way that reflect the reality on the ground. Excellencies, the dire situations in Myanmar call for the international community's immediate and comprehensive actions to end military impunity. The international communities must understand that the situations in Myanmar is beyond a political crisis. it is now indeed a humanitarian and human rights crisis. There is no feasible or lasting or just solution that will come from the military. Therefore, it is time to refrain from relying on ASEAN and its 5-point consensus in bringing peace and security to Myanmar. The military is clearly not committed to ending its violence. Diplomatically engaging with the junta will also embolden it to commit more crimes against the country's people. ASEAN welcoming the junta defense minister to the 68th ASEAN defense ministers meeting today should remind governments to pursue other practical paths for accountability, all of which reflect the call of the region's civil society. International community should rather engage with the Myanmar democracy movement, including the National Unity Government, National Unity Consultative Council, and other related bodies, Rohingya and other ethnic groups and civil society organizations in finding solutions to end such crisis in a way that uphold the maxim of never again. Thus, in line with our decades-long call, the government must impose coordinated financial penalties and economic sanctions on the military and its related businesses, including the Myanmar oil and gas enterprise. Sanctions are crucial in cutting the military's lifeline and lessen the possibility of its recurrence of sexual violence and other atrocities across Myanmar. Countries such as the United States should continue pursuing these sanctions in accordance with the Global Magnitsky Act, as well as by ensuring revision to and passing the Burma Act. Simultaneously, country must also impose arms embargoes on Myanmar, ending one of the tools that has fueled the military's ability to commit conflict-related sexual violence and other brutalities that may amount to war crimes is a step forward to preventing its recommission. The UN Security Council resolution can implement these sanctions, and in line with the UN General Assembly's resolution last June and an arms embargo. The Council must uphold its obligations as well as the responsibility to protect and women's peace and security agenda. I remind the inquiry that the Council can do this despite this current position, as it took less than a day to introduce a resolution on the situations of Ukraine. However, as preventing a further recurrence of such crimes is not enough to end crisis in Myanmar, the Council should also refer Myanmar to the International Criminal Court. As one of the most important international accountability mechanism, pursuing this is a critical step in ending military's impunity and prosecuting the entirety of its crimes. Government must also support ongoing path to accountability for Myanmar, including the work of the UN Independent Investigative Mechanism for Myanmar and the UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights situations on Myanmar, as well as International Court of Justice Rohingya genocide case. Countries should also exercise their universal jurisdictions for the international crimes and gross human rights violations that have been committed by the military. These mechanisms must also be rooted in the full engagement and inclusions of victims and survivors of atrocities, particularly sexual violence. These accountability mechanisms also serve the purpose of recognizing the pain and suffering of the victims and survivors of such crimes. Thus, more governments should also work towards officially recognizing the atrocity to which people of Myanmar have been subjected. These include the genocide against Rohingya, as was demonstrated by the US government this March. Lastly, the international community should bolster their support for the country's civil society, including by enabling cross-border aid, providing direct financial and material support of need. Women's groups and other civil society organizations are experts of their respective communities and are often the only source of their support. Such form of assistance should particularly benefit ethnic minorities and marginalized communities, including Rohingya, in a way that respects their agency, dignity, and rights. Today, Your Excellencies, the junta is what what is exacerbating the humanitarian and human rights crisis in Myanmar. Holding the Myanmar military accountable is the only way Myanmar can move forward. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thanks for the presentation. We now, in the last few minutes of the 2-hour session. So please keep the questions short from the committee, the inquiry committee. And you can direct the questions to both Htoo Htoo as well as to Waiwai Nu. So when you raise the questions, please direct it to either one of them. So it's easy to follow up. Inquiry committee, the floor is yours.
Charles.
Ibu Masih, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. Thank you very much for Ms. Waiwai Nu and Htoo Htoo for your explanations. I do believe that one case of the human right issue is the human right crimes. It's very important standard. So as you described that the situation is very systematic, massive and unstoppable of human rights case increase day by day. So for the situation of the human rights situation and respond, what do you think about the problem in response the critical issue about the human rights cases? The heaviest related with the mechanism, procedure and mechanism from the HURIDOC, human rights documentation, local to the national, and national have to comply with the international mechanism, or it's related, the problem is related with the substantive effective response from the international community like UN, ASEAN, etc. Because you said it's very pragmatically responding the human rights issue, give distributions, the human rights aid assistance, something like that. But the situation is very slow to be response. So what do you think about that? So we can.
Mercy, the question is for Waiwai Nu or for Ms. Htoo Htoo?
For both of the
okay.
witnesses. Yeah.
Can we have another question, and then we can ask them to sum up? Any other questions from the inquiry committee? Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, your turn.
Thank you both for your insightful testimonies. I am curious if you can maybe answer this question: what protection is being given and what is lacking for Myanmar refugees?
Okay. One last question maybe from the inquiry committee.
Should I answer?
I'm sorry, who's this? Hold on, Htoo Htoo. If there's any question before you can sum up a response. Didipon, any questions from you? Bapak Taufik, any questions? Okay. All right, there are only 2 questions. So please, either of you can start answering them. Htoo Htoo, you want to go first and then followed by Ms. Waiwai Nu?
Yeah, regarding the protections for the refugee in our area, I mean current state, time in my border, the protections for refugee is not the standard like I just explained, because even they are not refugee yet, they are displaced people and facing many barriers to cross to Thailand because of the reformers. Thai government accept only few of them with a certain support limited area, and they don't let UNHCR and other humanitarian actors to access the place. So the protection is we can say that very less, and when the extra happen, when the shelling happen, the mortar drop just beside the informant camps in the river. So with the fear that they will get killed when they ran into this into the Thai-Burma border, but on the next day they were pushed back. Oh, no guns sound, you should return. So that this kind of reformers happening, and also from Myanmar side, there is no like a UNHCR and other UN agency and INGO can access to provide the protection service and other humanitarian support. Thank you.
Thank you. Waiwai Nu.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. To answer the second question, I guess I will reverse the questions. As Htoo Htoo said, there are very little to no protections mechanisms available for the refugees in Thailand, and often refugees and displaced persons are living with the fear of being arrested, detained, or by the Thai authorities or intelligence and other security forces in the borders. And in the sites of Bangladesh, where about 1 million Rohingya refugees are living, the situations in Bangladesh has been deteriorating day by day. There are no safety and security for the refugee whatsoever. Anybody can be killed or abducted or sexually exploited or trafficked anytime without any checks or any rule of law at all. And the nighttime, there is no security in the camps at all, and refugees are extremely vulnerable. And recently, in the past several months, the Bangladesh authority has been imposing many forms of restrictions against their livelihood, including destroying the small grocery shops that they sell on the street, or seizing telephone, or asking rickshaw drivers to pay a lot of money, or disemploying the Rohingya volunteers from the INGOs, and restricting freedom of movement by fencing the camps, even restricting travel within one camp to another camps. There are so many levels of the restrictions and pressures had put in place recently by the authorities, and where the refugees have no access, refugee children have no access to educations, and where many of them are forced to relocate to Bashangsha. So situations in Bangladesh is extremely concerning, and there are so many reports and news that you could find out so that there should be adequate response to the crisis. And to answer the first questions on the human rights crisis and how to respond it, I think first, the most important thing is to continue to support the human rights organizations and groups on the ground so that they can continue to document the crisis on the ground and continue to report to the relevant bodies and organizations, and provide support, so provide protections for the human rights defenders and activists on the ground. And those are some of the things that are locally done. And in terms of ending the human rights crisis, we definitely, as I mentioned in my remark, we definitely need to end the military's impunity as soon as possible. And there are a number of justice processes ongoing. As I mentioned, the case at the International Court of Justice, that case should be supported by the countries, including United States, including Indonesia, including Malaysia and ASEAN member states. Their case should be supported. And there are universal jurisdictions cases ongoing, and the country should explore more universal jurisdiction cases. In terms of criminal accountability, we are calling for the International Criminal Court referral by the UN Security Council so that the court can prosecute the entire crimes. Right now, they can only prosecute the crimes of deportations under the crimes against humanity, which is very limited crimes in compare with the entirety of the crimes. Without that, there has been discussions around creating an ad hoc tribunal. Logistically thinking, it will be extremely challenging to create a new court where the International Criminal Court is designed to prosecute such crimes, and it has already initiated an investigations, as well as it has the resources already in there. So it might be easier to really prosecute these crimes at the International Criminal Court rather than creating an ad hoc tribunal. But if that's what the UN Security Council or General Assembly want, yes, we are we're not objecting ad hoc tribunal. It is also a good option, but it might be a challenging to really set up a new thing. However, I think it is critical that the current or ongoing mechanisms here and there are fully supported by the governments and states. Right now, there aren't enough support. As you know, the case before the International Court of Justice was brought by the small nation Gambia, and thank you, the Gambian government and politicians. But big countries, big nations like United States, the UK, the France, they have not supported anything on the accountability yet. It's such a shame, and I think that has to be changed, and they have obligations under their national laws and under the international law, under the UN Charter, and that has to be fulfilled to protect people. Thank you.
Thanks, Waiwai Nu. I think we need to wrap up now. It's 6 minutes past the second hour. To all our witnesses, we extend our appreciation for their time and for sharing their deep knowledge, the anxiety, the fear, and the various experiences, and a sense of lots of hope in the presentations that you have all made. Rest assured that your inputs will be recorded and incorporated in our final report to be published in September.